Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, Beyond the Transaction, Sustainability and Professional Excellence in Real Estate. My name is David Hendrickson. I manage special projects here at the Real Estate Foundation of BC. And I'm going to be moderating our really exciting webinar today. And we will be finishing by 1 p.m. sharp. Maybe before we get started, I just wanted to acknowledge that we are on unceded and traditional territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations. And just a little bit about the Real Estate Foundation of BC. You know, we provide grants to nonprofit organizations serving the real estate community around the province, different initiatives to support research, public and professional education, and policy analysis. And, you know, the real estate profession is one of 5 interest areas that we work in. The other 4 areas are land use, fresh water, food lands, and built environment. So we're really excited that you've joined us today on this webinar. And we will be providing a copy of this report that just came in off the press in a PDF link. And you'll also get a copy of the recording of this webinar that you can, you're free to share. You know, you might have other colleagues or friends that are not able to take part in the webinar live. And we hope that this can be a useful resource in the future. So maybe before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping here. Everybody's muted on the webinar. And if you want to share a message, you'll see down here, there's the share and there's the Q&A folder at the bottom of your screen. And the chat box, you would go to everybody and it would just be a comment that you might want to make. But if you have a question, we encourage you to actually enter it there at the bottom in the Q&A folder. And we will try to get to as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation and until 1 o'clock. So we started on this, REFBC commissioned this research on professional excellence in real estate back about a year ago now, I guess it is. And, you know, some of the goals of our initiative included, we wanted to try to deepen our understanding about how real estate professionals and industry partners demonstrate leadership and innovation. We wanted to try to identify, you know, what's the extent of knowledge that real estate professionals have about our foundation, the Real Estate Foundation of BC, and so that we could develop a value proposition. We wanted to try to identify different types of professional development that folks might be interested in. And we wanted to identify some examples and best practices, some innovative models for organized real estate that they might be interested in collaborating on. And we also wanted to take a step back and look at our own granting strategies and look at if there was things that we might be able to tweak to increase our impact in the area of the real estate profession. So as part of this research, we started with organizing a couple of focus groups with managing brokers. One focus group was based in Metro Vancouver, and the other focus group was of managing brokers from around BC, and that one was by telephone. Then we also conducted 200 telephone interviews of about 15 minutes each with 200 managing brokers. And we also interviewed 154 realtors from around the province. And then we also did some website scans of both organized real estate and nonprofits working in real estate. And we also conducted a survey to different nonprofits in BC that are working on different real estate initiatives. And finally, we had some focus group meetings with the three bodies in organized real estate, the Real Estate Institute, the Real Estate Association, and the Real Estate Council. And so we took all of these findings. Actually, I didn't. Our speaker today, Coral Strandberg, did, and she produced this report. And this is really what we're going to be discussing today is the findings from the report. So just a little bit about Coral. Coral is president of Strandberg Consulting, and she advises businesses, governments, and nonprofits on strategies to embed sustainability into businesses and industry practices. She's past chair of Van City, a role in which she helped develop the credit union's value-based business strategy. And today, Coro is actually teaching through the Directors College and Governance Professionals of Canada. And she advises on federal environment and sustainability strategies. And she also serves on the board of the BC Lotteries Corporation. So we're basically going to get started with, Coro's going to present for about 25 minutes on the results of the research. And during that time, we'll have a couple poll questions actually for you to make this a little bit more interactive. And so when a poll question does pop up on your screen, we encourage you, to answer. Obviously, there's no right answer, but to respond to it. And then we'll take a look at the results. And then, I'll be asking Coro a few questions based on her her presentation, and then we're going to turn it over to you. And that's where, if you provide us with any questions that you might have in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen there, we'll try to get to as many as we can. So I guess without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Coro Strandberg. Welcome, and thanks for joining us today, Coro.
I just want to say to all of you, I'm very excited to be sharing the findings of this research. As we jump into it, albeit David just passed things over to me, but I'm going to pass things back to him to initiate our first poll, where we are going to find out who's here. So David, maybe you can do that little bit of moderation, and then we'll jump in.
Sure, I'll try to moderate this one. So actually, we do have a poll question to start off, just to get an idea of who is on this call. If you can just, take a look and check all that apply. I mean, do you belong to a professional association or an industry association? You might be a realtor or managing broker, or you might just work for a real estate organization, and that might include, say, a nonprofit in real estate. Or the final question, does your work include aspects of sustainability and or quality of life? So we'll just give you a few seconds. You can just click there on the screen, and we'll take a look at the results. I'll just give everybody a couple seconds to finish clicking on the poll. And there we have it. So the majority belong to an industry association. That's interesting. And their work does include aspects of sustainability and quality of life. Great, that gives us a little bit of knowledge about our audience. Coro, over to you.
All right. So moving along here, just making sure, there we go. Okay, so The presentation today, I will be just alerting you to the focus, the purpose of the report. David's already touched on the methodology, so I'll just give you a brief overview of that. And we'll spend most of our time talking about the findings from the research and the suggestions that are prompted by the research. Here we have the report, and I just mostly want to flag the very intriguing title, Beyond the Transaction, which I wish I could claim was my own genius, but we got that from one of the focus groups we held. Somebody said, well, we need to start to look beyond the transaction, so we thought we would just use that language to frame the discussion. So the purpose of the report, as has been mentioned by David, is what we wanted to do here was look at opportunities to enhance professional development in real estate that better enhances quality of life in BC, and I'm going to elaborate on some of these terms in a few minutes. We also wanted to understand what was the value proposition to engage real estate professionals in quality of life issues. Now, going into this project, we did wrestle with what we would call either sustainability or quality of life. Like, what would be the term that we would use, or the word we would use to begin a conversation within this community? And we found from the start, of course, that there isn't a common term or definition or standard for sustainability. Again, I'll circle back to that. It's one of the findings of the research. So we thought we would use the language of quality of life principles, which were adopted, I think, about 2004 or so by the BC Real Estate Association. And this is on their website and profiled there. And their boards, their regional boards, use this as the way of talking about sustainability. So this was the basis for the research, using this language of quality of life that looks at these 5 principles here: economic vitality, housing opportunities, preserving the environment, protecting property owners, and building better communities. I'm not going to spend too long on this. David's already shared with you what the methodology was, but what is the takeaway? This was very comprehensive research, albeit still fairly high level and fairly qualitative. We were just trying to get some directional insights, if you will, from scanning websites of real estate organizations to see the state of play, to do some opinion research of both professionals who work in the industry and those who represent them in their professional organizations. So it was a pretty significant group of people that were engaged in the consultation. I'm going to just share with you here some highlights from the Mustel Group's research, which I pulled into the final report. Now, Mustel Group is known for conducting market research and opinion research, so they were the go-to for the Real Estate Foundation to host the focus groups and conduct the online surveys and this kind of thing. So again, I'm just going to share some high-level findings. All of this is reported in the final research report that was issued today. But let's look into a few of the key insights. So here is from their online survey of managing brokers and realtors. And the questions that was asked of them: have you read or heard anything about the quality of life principles which have been adopted by the Real Estate Association of BC? So it's almost 50-50 whether they've heard of it or not. So I'll leave you to judge whether that's good or bad. But it's not bad, take up on the part of this audience that they had heard of it. We then asked, Mustel had an open-ended question around in what ways, if any, you could read this with me at the bottom there, if any, in what ways, if any, do you think your business and employees are aligned with these principles or applying them? And this was a question of managing brokers. And these are the kinds of things that their business and their employees are doing. Let's just look at the headlines: building better communities, 35%, playing a role to enhance the housing supply and other types of affordable housing initiatives, 21%, preserving the environment, 15% of all replies, ensuring economic viability, looking in here, including ideas of local ownership and hiring local employees and other things, and then protecting property owners. Again, these are the 5 principles, quality of life principles, and these are the different ways that managing brokers felt that they and their employees were activating on the quality of life. So a lot of diversity, but still somewhat modest results here in the findings. We asked them also, both managing brokers and realtors, go with me to the question box here. What do you think of the idea of a quality of life realtor, one who is visibly demonstrating these qualities of life principles in their everyday business? On a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 means poor idea and 5 means excellent. So we have about a third right across. I mean, one thing to draw attention to is that they are responding similarly. They think the same way, and the average 3.7 is recently high, that they think it's a good idea, and about 1/3 think it's an excellent idea that managing brokers and realtors would demonstrate these kinds of practices in their everyday work. We asked them as well, what benefits could be achieved with the quality of life principles? This is addressing the value proposition for moving in this direction. And there's just a bit of diversity here. Managing brokers and realtors agree with the top benefit of improving the reputation of the industry. Drop down to here, viewed as trustworthy, 10%, not as significant to managing brokers, but 1/3 of realtors think it would build public trust. And brokers have a view that it would improve sales, more clients, a little bit more than realtors do. So the other point I'd like to draw your attention to, and we'll come back to this later, is this 20%, the third item here, who I think that the value proposition is just self-satisfaction of knowing that you're making the world a better place. So that a reason for doing this is just because of personal motivation, that I guess you would say personal purpose, the way people want to show up in their day-to-day work and how they want their work to be a force of good, and that makes them feel good, and that makes them feel proud at a personal level. So that was quite interesting to find that 20% felt that way. All right, so that's the Mustel research. Again, that's all rolled up in the final report. Now I'm going to share with you some of the findings from the website scan and the research that I conducted into what do professional associations and nonprofit organizations think about this frame of quality of life activation amongst realtors and within the real estate profession. So I scanned a number of websites of real estate organizations, about 24 overall. These are those who are formally involved as real estate associations, but also nonprofits that work in this area. And we found really across all the websites that on the website, members of these organizations are being encouraged to engage in these quality of life practices. So there's just a general sense that these are good things. However, it's hard to find a fully comprehensive, or what I would call a holistic approach to quality of life. And it didn't seem always to be central to the core mandates of these organizations. So they're sort of like add-ons, but not central to the mandate. And it would appear, because we couldn't see any kind of a comprehensive approach, that maybe what was going on were sort of more ad hoc undertakings, or certainly opportunistic undertakings. And thus, it didn't seem to be a really sort of a strategic agenda, and not based on a professional competency model, like what are the competencies that a professional would need in this area. We couldn't find that. That's not to say that they didn't exist, but they were not in the top easily accessible pages of the websites. And then the Real Estate Council of BC was the only organization not explicitly active in quality of life. Now, that would be attributed to their mandate that they've been specifically given from the government in terms of licensing and other things. So when we, this is again some highlights from the Mustel research, some professional opinions that were communicated by the realtors themselves, that there's low to moderate awareness of sustainability and quality of life dimensions. We found in the research that 1/3 are already actively contributing to communities. And on the matter of this, this sort of thought bubble or thought experiment, this matter of a quality of life realtor who's demonstrating principles in everyday business, yeah, it's a good idea. But when asked what would that involve, there really was a bit of a breakdown from there. Like, I'm not sure exactly what it would entail, but that sounds like a good idea. And on the other hand, there is a cohort who are not so interested. Maybe about 1/4 to 1/3 don't see them as being valuable, these ideas, perhaps aren't interested in them and are not implementing them. On the matter of the value proposition, we do find this interest in the reputation and sales prospects, and this group of 20% or so that find this to be just a matter of self-satisfaction. And then on what kind of resources would you like to see brought to bear on this question, they're looking for how-to resources, research conducted into certain areas of quality of life practices, looking for professional development, also accredited courses, and better understanding of the case. This is what it is that they would find to be helpful. So then we asked the opinions of leaders from 3 real estate organizations in what the foundation refers to as organized real estate. And when we met with them across the group, they found that these principles, these quality of life principles, are relevant to their industry. And definitely more and more in the future, paying attention to the trend lines. Down here below, we see some top topics. This was sort of off the top of their head, what they thought were priority areas to be thinking about: green buildings, climate change and its impact on real estate, biodiversity, including invasive species issues, green infrastructure and transportation, so EV charging stations, this kind of thing, alternative transportation options, social issues, a little bucket there, sustainable communities, and then having green office practices was named as something of interest. So this is another slide on what these organized real estate associations thought were important. They all thought that they would be open to offering more quality of life professional development in the future. The kinds of things that were on their mind would be education, including accreditations, accredited education on the topic, and perhaps even designations where one could receive a badge or some initials that indicated that they had qualified for a certain higher level of performance in this area. And peer learning would be something else to pursue, where people can learn together in cohorts, and more research, providing news, and, including this in their communications. And they thought awards and other types of recognition to promote this and draw attention to it, and of course, case studies of organizations and businesses and realtors who are working in this area. Now, this group was given an open-ended opportunity to speak to the value proposition, and this is kind of a roll-up of what they thought would be worthwhile and reasons why this professional group should start to build its competencies and capacities and know-how in this area, that it would build competitive advantage for those who did, attracting customers who are looking for that kind of value added. It would be a way to manage future risks in their advice that they're offering, and for the profession generally, that it would build public trust, that it would modernize their businesses, creates a leadership profile for those who have these kinds of practices at the community level. They would have that kind of brand and would be represented as leaders in their communities. It would build pride on the part of those in the business. It would future-proof the professionals and their businesses by looking at these emerging social and environmental trends, economic trends that are going to affect the business in the future. So if you're looking at these things and addressing them through your business, it makes your business future fit, if you will. That this offers career development opportunities for some. And another driver is, peer pressure, fear of missing out in the industry. So that could be a driver. And that it would create a virtuous circle. The more realtors might pursue these practices, the more business they could attract, the more business they could attract, the more they could be pursuing these practices, and that virtuous circle would hold for the professionals as a group, as a body in BC. This idea of creating a virtuous circle by building out these kind of practices and thereby attracting business and growth. So these were among the value proposition ideas that were brainstormed in these focus groups. And then lastly, we also asked what were the barriers and the opportunities to advancing in this area over the next 5 years, 10 years or so. These barriers won't surprise this audience, that there are some barriers for members of their associations, which is, it's not seen as being a priority for members. It's not something that they're clamoring to learn more about, or at least the associations are not hearing of it from their members. The members lack the business case, like what is exactly the benefit to my business if I were to move in this direction? How does it provide more value to the customer, and are customers looking for this kind of thing? And further, they have other priorities right now, such as obviously meeting regulatory standards. The organizational barriers to the associations we consulted was that this topic was not in their strategic plan, and it was not named as something in their mandate per se. So at the sort of governance level, these were not sort of drivers, and they lacked resources to build out work in this area, and they were not themselves seeing the lack of they didn't see any demand coming from members. They weren't hearing about it, so it was hard to just take initiative without knowing that this was something that their members would want to see. On the opportunity side, thinking about what would be opportunities ahead, they saw opportunities in fact, developing some curriculum in this area more intentionally and offering some courses. They thought that some research could help with that, and that if they went in this direction, this would be a way to engage members and make members sort of re-engage, re-excite members in being involved with the association by giving members some other ways to contribute and learn and build their own self-satisfaction and pride and knowledge and things like that. It would be a route to member engagement. They thought that perhaps what might need to happen is some kind of a proof of concept, or what does it look like? What are the pilot projects that we could pursue? Can we get an early adopter group together? Like, how do we sort of kickstart some best practices in this area and start to create a bit of a model for what this could look like? And also notably, they thought that going forward, that it would be important not just to work with the real estate profession per se, but all those in the value chain, architects and developers, insurance, and other kinds of the folks that are involved in the whole real estate undertaking. Can we look to get alignment across these other parties and bring more energy and thus more impact and a bigger value proposition, which if the value chain was organized this way, it would really become even more of a driver of quality of life in British Columbia, which everybody would benefit from, including the industry. So these are some things that we saw were opportunities ahead. Now we did a survey of regional boards under the auspices of the Real Estate Association of BC, their regional boards from across the province. And we also did a survey in the same survey of nonprofit organizations who are working in real estate. And we found amongst them that there was a high awareness of the principles and a high degree of support for the principles. And the one they liked the most of the 5 was the one about building better communities. These are the top topics that came through that survey: green buildings, energy efficiency, energy rebates, climate change, again, sustainable active transportation, and smart growth in cities and in urban areas. So these were some of the topics that they prioritized. And in terms, again, of the value proposition, because we were always looking to find out what would stimulate realtors to move in this direction. They, as with the others, found many benefits, and they ranked reputational benefits and contributing to strengthening local communities the highest reasons why realtors would be interested in this. The last point in the argument being, the stronger the community, the more viable the housing market and this kind of thing. So those were some of the aspects of the value proposition from this group. Now, we asked them what they were doing already in this area. About 2/3 of them are already offering professional development on quality of life. I think there were about 4 real estate boards of, I think, about 11 or 12 that responded, and one of them indicated that they were involved in professional development on the topic. About 3/4 would be happy to offer more. One respondent indicated that they didn't think that this was a good idea, getting realtors involved in sustainability or quality of life activation, because realtors don't influence development and where they thought the biggest opportunities were to be had, and that if realtors were more aware of sustainability, this will not change the product or improve community. So I share that with you so that this audience understands that there are some outliers, and basically those perspectives are really because it was felt that realtors wouldn't have any influence in the product or in how this showed up in community. So this could be debated, and we could have some questions on this later on. Now, these 4 real estate boards said that they themselves were interested in offering more professional development. Everybody is looking for accredited courses and events. We know that if the course is accredited, that it draws more interest. And some are thinking that this should in fact be mandatory within continuing education programs for realtors. And in terms of the barriers, as before, the members of these organizations don't understand the business benefits. They're too busy, they have other priorities, and the organization lacks resources to help them. So that's a fairly kind of common set of constraints. Now, I'm going to pivot now to what the top takeaways were, which is that the principles are relevant, they lack activation or steps to embellish them, and a business case. This lack of a competency model or roadmap, that's currently not in strategic plans or mandates. There is, however, openness on the part of organized real estate to look into this, and that there's a bell curve of realtor and managing broker interest. I'm just going to give you an example of what I mean by this bell curve, which is in the report. There's your bell curve. This was on looking right across all the research we did on quality of life activation. There are those who are status quo oriented. Then we have the middle majority who are saying that they're interested but need to be convinced, and then we have these early adopters. Now, I'm going to hand it over to David, who's just going to do a quick poll on where you think you are on the bell curve.
Thanks, Coral. So we're going to pop up another poll question here. Would you consider yourself like in the status quo, the middle majority, or as an early adopter? And again, obviously there's no right answer. We're just trying to gauge, how you would consider yourself in terms of where you're at. So we'll just give it a few more seconds to put in a response there, and then we'll ask Kamiko to pull up the results. And the results are, oh, interesting. More early adopters and less status quo. Back to you, Coral.
All right. So, so interesting to see that it's overweighted to the early adopters, and we're seeing some distribution similar to the research that we conducted. But I've got a few status quo people, so I'm going to see if I can move you along by the end of the session. Anyways, okay, so top takeaways, I'm just picking up at number 6, that there's a desire for accredited courses and an early adopter program, pilots and case studies as potential priorities. There's a desire for customer research. And what is the value proposition? What are customers looking for today and in the future? And have some research on the trends that will affect the profession and how they should be equipped to prepare. And this was another takeaway, which is this, that there is this sort of vicious circle, which is that the lack of member demand, members being too busy, the lack of resources on the part of associations, the lack of a business case. There's sort of no, at this point, no demand to start to foster activation in this area. So it creates this question: how can we move into that vicious circle, that virtuous circle I mentioned earlier, where the more of these sustainability practices that can be adopted, the greater the public trust that can be built, the more the stronger the reputation of the profession, the more viable the profession is, and that allows the profession to become more active on sustainability pursuits at the community level. So this was a sort of a thought question that the project elevated. So now I'm going to give you some suggestions that came from the research on how to enhance professional excellence in real estate. And these are what you might think of as the recommendations or the suggestions that bubbled up. Now, when I go through this, please keep track of the number. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, because these numbers are going to be revealed in the, well, actually, that's not quite true anymore. Anyways, do pay attention to which of these you like the most, because there's a poll coming up after where you're going to be asked, which are your favorite? Okay, so a suggestion from the research is to define quality of life for realtors, managing brokers, and organized real estate. In that, there is no yet common terminology or definition. And then test that against different demographic groups, including millennials and ethnic groups, and see what they think of these definitions. The second idea is to come up with this business case for quality of life, professionalism, conduct some research on the trends affecting the future of the real estate profession, some risks that they might want to get ahead of. Number 3, develop a competency model. Like, what does it mean to speak to a quality of life professional? Create some accredited courses that deliver on that competency model. We bring together organized real estate and nonprofits to determine the opportunity to support each other in this area, and develop sort of a full array of accredited and non-accredited professional development, and perhaps consider putting this into mandatory professional training in the future. Whole sort of competency model idea. The number 4 is looking at those who are early adopters. Study what their practices are, and can we create this sort of continuum of early practices, advancing practices, and then really special practices, really impactful practices, what we might call a transformational professional or a purposeful professional, and start to have some high impact practices along the continuum. So what do you think of that idea? Is that worth putting some time into? Number 5, consider creating an early adopter group, a peer cohort that's helping each other develop these best practices and create case studies around them. Convene organized real estate and nonprofits working in real estate to collaborate on these prototypes and pilots, and start to develop some case studies so we can have a more explicit conversation about what this looks like. Another idea: what about helping professional associations themselves move in this sort of transformational area? Like, could professional associations have in their mandates an intent to help their professional members become more, I'll put this in air quotes, sustainable, and replicate this within the real estate industry, so that more and more industry associations within real estate are all sort of putting their shoulder to this question of how can we create more positive social outcomes from the sector. I'm going to skip over number 7 just in the interest of time. I'm going to go to number 8, engage academic institutions, UBC, SFU, UMBC, UVic, etc., to include quality of life competencies within their offerings, so that those who graduate from their real estate courses, they get this material embedded right in the courses. Number 9, what about managing brokerages as businesses? Could we create a framework to help them find ways to embed quality of life through the way that their businesses are run? What would that look like? Can we create this idea and get scale by working at that level? Number 10, as was mentioned, this sort of value chain model. Can we elaborate on that? Can we find out how adjacent professions and professional associations, notaries, architects, and others, we got the value chain together and started to think about how we can create more sustainable or social impact from the value chain working together? Would that create a stronger brand, build more trust, and create more sustainable communities? So could we work on that? Number 10, number 11, how about supporting organized real estate and nonprofits working there to help them to conduct some more research and develop these partnerships and collaborations? Can they be supported if they wish to update their strategic plans to make this more of a priority? What would they need for that? Would they want to do that? Have conversations with them about that, and again, develop the business case for why the association should be working in this area, more over and above why their members should, but why would an association want to do that? And then 12, what about the potential to collaborate with provincial and national association counterparts? Can we work across Canada to share these findings and create a bit more of a model? So these were the ideas, and now over to you, David, for the last poll.
Okay, thanks. So we have another poll question. And I'll ask Kamiko to pull that one up. There we go. So suggestions at a glance. Check 3 things that you'd like to see happen. And we have definition, business case trends, a competency model, transformational professional model, early adopters and case studies, social purpose professional association, post-secondary training, quality of life managing brokerage, quality of life value chain, and finally a national approach, collaboration and strategic planning. So we're just give you a few more seconds here to check up to 3 things that you would like to see. And then we will ask Kamiko, if you will, to pull up the findings, and we'll see where people are at. Interesting again. So we have people are really interested in getting to the definition and the business case and trends, 60%. Also, a competency model is high, post-secondary training at 40%. And I guess the last one is a national approach around collaboration and strategic planning. Quite interesting. Okay, back to you, Coral.
All right, so I'm just driving to a bit of a close here. And we'll be just sharing with you some of my, if you will, thoughts on what you can do. Obviously, read the report. But think, as you do, think of the implications for your profession or your industry and your daily work. What is the significance for how you show up and how you partner with your peers and colleagues and others in the industry? Encourage realtors and managing brokers that you know to read the report and engage in future projects in this area. Look at the Real Estate Foundation's granting programs, and if you've got a project idea that fits with this topic, contact the grants team there. And of course, contact the foundation if you'd like to receive more information on this topic in the future. So there we have it. And I will pass things over to David for the questions.
Great, thank you, Cora. I mean, this is really, really interesting. Again, I'm just going to wave this report out here and remind people that you will get a PDF link sent to you after the webinar in the days ahead. And I encourage you, if you do have questions, you know, put them in the Q&A section. But I know just listening to you, a couple questions came up for me, and I thought I'd just start with those. And maybe a somewhat obvious one is that, you know, realtors, they don't get paid unless they make a sale. And, you know, that's their bread and butter. So why should they care? What is the business case or the value proposition for a realtor working in BC?
Well, that's a $1 million question, isn't it? Or maybe 2 million, depending on the market you're in. It's a bit of a joke, but it does come up, of course, like what would stimulate realtors to move in this direction, and it is a finding that more research should be done on this to really, bear down on the evidence of the business case, for sure. But if you're asking my opinion, having sort of studied this and being involved in the research for the last 9 months, I'll tell you a top reason is that the business model is changing due to technology disruption, and that can't be ignored. This is a time to rethink the value proposition, and arguably, if you're not, you could be putting your business at jeopardy. So what is that new value proposition as the industry moves from bricks and mortar to what people are calling click and order? Right? Where do you fit in the new order of things? Historically, a major role of agents has been to provide information that wasn't available. But with so much information now available to consumers online, that role will need to change. They'll shift from being guardians of information, right, to being a professional service provider, trusted advisor. And so what's under the hood of trusted advisor? What builds trust? What could be offered there? The value, the original value perhaps is vanishing, and in that they no longer have exclusive ownership of data, and you're going to need more different sort of new features, different things to be offering customers. So could this be part of the offer of the future? So that's a big driver, I think a main driver. And another one is, of course, the new consumer, the millennial consumer. And what we understand about millennials is that more and more, not all of them, but more and more, they're becoming interested in these kinds of quality of life issues, and they want to live in this sort of quality of life way. They've got these new values that they're looking for, and might they come to a realtor who can help them understand the way to, live a healthy life that's connected to the community, and partner with their realtor to find those kind of opportunities, and even learn from the realtor about how to create and generate more value in their own lives as homeowners. So millennial customers might be a reason.
Okay, great. I think what you're saying, like we're already seeing some disruption in the industry, and that is going to continue, and actually it could escalate in the future. Another question I had was just maybe this is more a practical question, but if you're a realtor or a managing broker, like what could you start doing like tomorrow? Are there some practical, tangible things that you can just kind of list off to get us thinking about, okay, well, here I am. What can I do?
Well, to be honest, my main piece of advice on what to do tomorrow would be to contact their association, about the need for professional development in this area. If associations start to hear about it, it will really drive the opportunity. Because from there, I would have to, encourage practitioners to, read the report, and there's a section in there that speaks to the kinds of practices that people already have underway. And maybe I would refer people to the report to get some insights about what they could do right away.
And are there resources out there, like in a clearinghouse of resources that people can find? Did you find anything?
Well, I did not explicitly go looking for that. It wasn't so much in scope for the research, but nonetheless, in having, worked my way around the sector, the profession, I didn't see a go-to resource hub. Yeah? Okay. And wouldn't that be a good thing? Have a go-to resource hub where these things could be made available. Okay.
And I mean, what you wrote the report, what did you find most interesting, within the results that came up? What kind of intrigued you?
Well, I found it all very compelling. But if I had to say what were some of the top sort of fascinations, I guess, one thing, because I work in the sustainability field with other, professional groups, industry associations, business, etc. So one thing that really struck me was how diverse the business case is. There's, some are really kind of short-term, sales-driven. Others are more medium-term, identifying, managing risks. Others are future-proofing. So you've got short-term drivers, long-term drivers. If you're just starting out your career, of course, you want to be looking, you'll have a bit more of a runway to think about these long-term drivers because you're in the business for the long term. But the diversity of the business case really struck me, meaning that there are lots of reasons to move and head in this direction, and risks if one doesn't. So that struck me. The other thing that struck me, frankly, is the high degree of support for this kind of concept of quality of life realtor. Like, there was a high degree of support of those who thought it was an excellent idea. So that struck me. And that tells you a bit about the profession, doesn't it? That they're aligned, sort of in a values basis, they're aligned. They want strong communities too, and a healthy environment. They know that that creates a better product. So the alignment was really profound, I thought, the degree of support for this undertaking. And then lastly, it just builds off the point I just made. It struck me that there's a core who are really dedicated to this idea for personal reasons. And they're living in these communities, and they want to contribute to these communities, and they're personally motivated. They find that by being a quality of life realtor, that they can have meaning at work. That struck me. And maybe these are the early adopters as well. But I found that they didn't really know how to take things to the next level. How to have more impact. They want impact, it's important to them. They would wake up every day probably, thinking of what kind of impact they could have and what they could do. They're personally driven, but they seem to lack, what would you do? Steps 1, 2, and 3 kind of thing to have more impact. Yeah, that struck me.
Right. And so do you see kind of a pathway to move forward? Is the industry equipped to move at this point in time? And what is the call to action at this point?
Well, I find this often with industry, if I may say, and I'm not an expert on your industry, so forgive me if I'm overgeneralizing, but I find it to be a fragmented industry. Yeah. And
can you say more about that? Like, what do you mean?
Well, because there's all these different parts in the value chain who all have their own, associations, the things that they're doing, regulations that they're paying attention to. And I didn't find, I'm not surprised I didn't find it, but I didn't find sort of a joined up approach. Those that are bringing the product to the market, those who are selling it into the market, and then frankly, those who are managing properties and other things like that, holistic. And so it's fragmented, which is not a surprise. It's a common issue. And so it strikes me that you have to start somewhere. And so it's good to start with maybe this group here. We certainly see some demand for it and some passion for it and openness to it, starting with this group, and then helping them develop their practices, make the value proposition more clear, start to shift the bell curve model a little bit, and then mobilize the value chain around it and really collaborate to define the opportunity. So if there's a lot of conferences and things, well, could add-ons to these industry conferences include some workshops and social innovation labs and collaboration opportunities where we're meeting up, but let's take half a day to start to imagine working together to build more social impact, more sustainability outcomes together. Isn't there a kind of an urgency about that? But when we meet up at these conferences, which we all do, can we start to add in more of this kind of collaboration? So the research did focus more on these sort of courses and professional development, but very quickly one would need to work to collaborating across the value chain for a joined up sort of approach where more societal impact and more beneficial outcomes can be achieved, more risks of the future can be managed, the business case can be brought to life, and then more value created for communities.
In the report, I mean, you talk about quality of life. I've heard it interchanged with sustainability. You know, there's also obviously like triple bottom line, CSR, which is corporate social responsibility. What terminology should we use, or should be used? I mean, is it all the same? Is it different? How to move forward on that?
Well, as the research revealed, as you're saying, there's no common term and no definition. We don't know what we mean by these things, and that is a barrier to progress. So until the value chain or certain groups in that can come up with some common terminology and definition, what do we mean by this? Until that happens, progress will stall. But on your point around what would be, I'd be a bit hard pressed to sort of tell the profession what I think it should be. But I can tell you what I'm seeing in the marketplace. I'm seeing corporate social responsibility is a bit on the demise because that kind of approach hasn't, companies are reporting, businesses are reporting, hasn't really created the impact that they're looking for. So I wouldn't latch onto that term. The person who coined the term triple bottom line, Don Elkington, he's recalled the term. He finds himself being unhappy with it because he felt that just sort of looking at social, environmental, and economic questions sort of in isolation, the triple bottom line didn't really create the joined up thinking needed to define a pathway for the future. So not that one. Sustainability works for me. Sustainable development works. And the other term maybe might in fact be social impact, or, you know, social purpose, like the sort of higher order frame for what is the purpose of the profession. You know, what's the purpose of the industry? Why does the profession exist? You know, what's the purpose of the profession? And businesses are being asked to define that, and maybe industry associations and professional associations can define that too. So these are other terms. So I'm just adding to the terminology confusion, but you know, quality of life could be fine. It's defined in quite an expansive way. It's owned by BCREA, so you might not want to settle on that, but move to some other kind of language so that everybody is part of developing the terminology. But you know, that's served the industry very well to this point, and hopefully we can decide where to go in the future.
So we only have a couple minutes left. I'll ask you one final question, I guess, and then we'll wrap up. But you know, speaking of the research, what kinds of research might organizations undertake to better understand, you know, the issues at hand and how to be solution oriented? Are there any ideas or trends that you're seeing in terms of future research?
Well, I do in my own, you know, my other work, I do focus a lot on trends. What are the trends? What are the emerging mega forces, global trends, social, environmental, economic, that could affect the viability of business and industry in the future, communities for that matter? And so research on those trends, I think, is an imperative. Like, what are they? And then how do they relate to our sector? So what do we see globally? Well, of course, climate change, the physical impacts of climate change, and then the transition to a low carbon economy, energy efficiency, carbon pricing, etc. That's one. Rising income inequality and the impact on the industry, affordable housing, inclusion, Indigenous reconciliation, is another topic. Social polarization, social fragmentation, the increasing gap between the rich and poor, and how those who feel left out are feeling. So social polarization is a trend. How that will show up? These are some resource scarcity, water scarcity, technological disruption beyond digitization. What are the other new technologies? Blockchain, virtual reality, etc. So there are a number of areas to focus.
There's a lot. Yeah, no, that's great. I just want to, it is 1 o'clock, so I want to wrap up right now. But I just want to thank you again for a really interesting take on the report. And just to commit to people, we will be sending out a link and a recording of the webinar. That won't be available probably until next Tuesday, just because of the long weekend. So, but we will be sending it via email. I'd just like to thank Kimiko and Stephanie on the back end today here at the Real Estate Foundation, Coro for your excellent presentation, and wish you a good afternoon and a happy long weekend. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.